Back to another Boxscore Geeks show. Once again, I am your host, Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. I'll be flying solo tonight. Don't worry, that's only because Patrick Minton is out in Las Vegas as we speak, getting ready to put his money where his mouth is, and you'll see more about that in upcoming posts. It's the off season still, and while there are preseason games, I have other things I'd like to talk about. So we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming NBA season, about what's coming on the site. We've seen your comments, but I've also had some other topics I've wanted to discuss, including Chris Bosh, Kevin Durant, and Klay Thompson. So, I wrote the articles for the last week about this, and since I'm here alone on the show, I'm going to talk even more about it for those of you that didn't already get enough. For those of you that don't remember, our esteemed producer, Brian, aka Boxscore Brian on Twitter. Brian, just shout yourself out so the fans know what you sound like.
How's it going, everyone? It's going to be a good show. There's even a special surprise that you have for us. I don't even know what it is, so this is going to be great. I can't wait to see it.
We'll see. Yeah, you're hyping. You're overhyping because I don't think it's going to make too many people that happy now. I think it's a huge surprise. I warned Brian in the pre-show I was gonna ask him a question, and it was gonna be a surprise in the third segment. Now Brian's hyping you up, so you'll have to let me know.
I think you know where Jimmy Hoffa's buried, maybe, or who shot JFK, something like that. Probably is what I'm expecting.
Yeah, topical news there, Brian. I think that's on the minds of every sports fan. Question for you, because one of the things we've discussed, and we'll keep pinging this out there, we're planning on doing a live show once we get close to the NBA actual season and just doing it weekly. Brian, are you just going to stay, the voiceless or the faceless voice, or are you actually going to have an image? So when I shout out to you to introduce yourself each week, are we going to see an image of you or actually see you, or is it just going to be the voice still?
No, I'll get on the show at some point. I've been on it before a couple times, and yeah, you'll see me again.
All right. So like I said, it's the off season, which means less interesting than things like NBA rake or prediction. I'm more interested in random subjects that come up. So for instance, Chris Bosh had an interview about Kevin Love and playing with LeBron James. And let's just start with the simple facts. Chris Bosh benefited so much from playing with LeBron James. It's not the best, and we should probably do an updated model. I've been bugging Dave Barry about this, but Basketball Reference has their own Hall of Fame metric, basically the odds that a player is going to get into the Hall of Fame based on regression of previous stats. Sorry, Brian, I didn't shoot that out to you. So if you find it cool and it shows up in front of everybody, great. But if not, if you go to any Basketball Reference player, if they're not in the Hall of Fame, they have an estimated score. And essentially what this is based on, again, some iffy parts, is their height, points per game, rebounds per game, etc. One of the bigger things that matters, though, is championships. So essentially, Chris Bosh, the sacrifice he made, we're going to talk about this, playing with LeBron James, is that he didn't get as many points per game. But if you examine his odds of getting into the Hall of Fame based on this regression, getting 2 titles is worth so much more than the points he gave up. And, really he didn't give up scoring. He just gave up shots. He used to take more shots in Toronto playing next to Wade and LeBron. He took fewer shots and ergo got fewer points. But you could also probably argue, given his efficiency, that he benefited. He got better shots playing next to those 2 guys. So the sacrifice thing kind of bugs me, especially because he played in 4 All-Star games when he was with the Heat. He had only made 1 All-NBA team before that in his career, and it had been years ago. So in terms of accolades, of course, in terms of pay, don't forget, in terms of him, LeBron James, and Dwayne Wade, he is the only one that came out of that with a max contract. The other guys, Wade took a hit and LeBron took a little less to play with Cleveland. So money-wise, Bosh, made out like a bandit. Accolades-wise, he got 3 finals, 2 titles, which are going to help his Hall of Fame chances. He made it to 4 All-Star games. It's really hard to believe he sacrificed anything. If you're looking at the definition of sacrifice, meaning giving something up. And, well, it's kind of true that he did. It's kind of true that he shot less per game. It's really hard. It's kind of saying, Brian, I had to give you $1, so you gave me 5. I just don't buy it. Although I will say,
anytime, I got your back, Jay.
Awesome. I will say the mental attitude of a lot of players that make to the NBA is such that they want to be the one taking the most shots. They want to be the center of attention. So I think he did give some of that up, but it's hard because he basically gave up being the center of attention in Toronto for being still a star in Miami and making more. Actually, Brian, I apologize because I didn't even intend to go on this tangent for this podcast, but Malcolm Gladwell in the book David and Goliath actually brings up this concept of if you go to a elite school versus a non-elite school and basically the impact it's going to have on your career. So if you go to a non-elite school and place in the top 15 or 25 percentile, that is a better indicator of success than if you go to Harvard and don't place in the top 25 percentile. So you'd assume a better school would make more for success than going to a worse school, but being, a big fish in a small pond. But part of the idea they have there is attitude. Basically, if you go to Harvard, you feel stupid, even if you're one of the smartest people in the country, likely you made it into Harvard, versus if you go to, school like I went to, CSU, you feel smart, even though you're in a smaller school. So actually, I can give Bosh, I'm sorry I'm waffling on this because I was definitely mean to Bosh, and I think Patrick wrote the article up too. I can see psychologically where that would hit Bosh, but I'm just saying realistically, if we want to point it out to Bosh, didn't really sacrifice anything. On that note, though, which is fascinating to me, is if we look at Chris Bosh's shot chart, wow, that's hard to say, which I did in the article. Patrick wrote this. I added some shot charts from Basketball Reference. Basically, when Chris Bosh was in Toronto, he basically just lived at the rim, and this makes sense. He got more rebounds. All of his points essentially came from at the rim. But when he went to Miami, he basically started spacing the floor more. He started taking more outside shots. He started taking corner threes. Now, we can put that in the coach, and we're going to talk about shot selection versus coach. But basically, what happened is Bosh went from playing at the rim in Toronto to playing away from the rim in Miami, and that caused a decrease in production. He wasn't getting as many rebounds. One of the best things he does is shooting, but because he was shooting less, that went down. So basically, the explanation for Bosh playing with LeBron is Bosh was no longer allowed to play at the rim, and as a result, his game went down. But again, his pay, all-star status, etc., stayed the same. But if we look at Kevin Love, this was kind of the dig Chris Bosh was making. Kevin Love's shooting ability is amazing. In fact, he is remarkable we already know this. He's remarkable from beyond the arc, but he's just got an incredible breadth. If you look at his shooting chart, which is on that post I brought up, Brian, he basically can shoot from a lot of the right side of the perimeter to all of the left side of the perimeter. He's got an amazing shooting ability, as well as we know even shooting from all these locations is able to rebound really well. So I just don't buy, and Patrick said the same thing, that Kevin Love is going to suffer like Chris Bosh playing next to LeBron James. Basically, the candid reality, and this is kind of rough on Chris Bosh, is once you got Dwayne Wade and LeBron James, Chris Bosh wasn't probably the best complementary player. And, it sounds mean, but, we look at the numbers and Chris Bosh was nowhere near the level of importance on that team as Wade and LeBron were, or even Chris Birdman. Chris Birdman was really what those guys needed, a center that could just, rebound and defer a lot. So probably a player like, Tyson Chandler would have been who they should have gone for and maybe won like 70 games. But as it was, Bosh's skill set didn't overlap. As a result, he wasn't really that productive. He probably kind of knows that, but it didn't hurt his career at all, really. And so as a result, it's kind of iffy to call it sacrificing, even though I just said the exact opposite a second ago. So that's all I got there. That came up on our radar, and we really, really wanted to talk about that. In terms of other things that came up on our radar, of course, and I'll talk more about why this impacts other things, Kevin Durant got injured. He basically had a Jones fracture, and that means he's going to have surgery on his foot, and he's probably going to be out about 8 weeks. It's always really hard to know on injuries. I think you and I talked about this, Brian, where, it's never the case where an athlete gets injured and the team or the athlete comes out pessimistic. Like, that's so rare. Kevin Durant's not going to come out and say, my foot really hurts, I'm probably not going to be 100%. The Thunder aren't going to come out and say, Kevin Durant's doing bad. I mean, we only need to look at Andrew Bogut on the Warriors to remember just how badly teams handle this. But some of the initial news seems to indicate that, Kevin Durant's probably going to be okay, but he's going to be out for a while. And the question is, going to be how are the Thunder going to do? And they are going to lose some games. That is going to hurt them. But the question a lot of people have is how is Westbrook going to be able to handle shouldering the load? Will Westbrook become an MVP candidate? And I didn't actually talk too much about this in the article. My personal take is Westbrook is a good player, but not for the reasons people think. I don't know if you're doing this, Brian, but right now I'm getting Russell Westbrook up in the player comparison engine on the site. And essentially, Westbrook is a slightly above average scorer, meaning his shooting percentage relative to a point guard is slightly above average. So it is a good thing that he shoots a lot, kind of. But all of the other stuff he does really comes on the defensive end. He's an amazing rebounder. He's really good at getting steals. He doesn't foul a lot. That's where he's good. So most people, when they think Westbrook is a good player, they think offense, scoring, owns the game, can score at will. He can't score at will, people, by the way. When I see this on Twitter, it drives me nuts. He has a 54.5% true shooting percentage last season, and that was his best season in terms of efficiency. That is worse than every single month of Kevin Durant's career in terms of shooting efficiency. The worst months in Kevin Durant's career are better than the best year of Russell Westbrook's shooting. He is not a score at will player. He is a very talented player that can do some things well, but we really need to point out that he's not an amazing scorer like Kevin Durant is. So with Kevin Durant out, the question is what's going to happen with Westbrook. And the reality is he's probably going to hold the ball more and he's probably going to shoot more. And neither of those things excite me because his assists are high. He gets 10.8 assists per 48 minutes. But if we compare his assist to turnover ratio, it's not really good. It's 10.8 to 6. That's not good. That's way worse than an average point guard. Additionally, the shots he takes, like I said, he's not a great shooter. And in past, he's been worse. So I think his points per game are going to go up. And I think people, and the Thunder are still a good team, although I've heard some people say they basically have a rough schedule with Durant out. So the reality is Westbrook's probably going to get a little bit more credit for all the points he gets. But I just don't see him shouldering the load without Durant. And one of the reasons I just brought this up is it's actually really hard to do on-off statistics. A lot of people will point to this. They'll point to 82 games. They'll point to adjusted plus minus, which tries to do things like when players are on and off the court. The reality is that Westbrook and Durant have played almost their entire career together. Durant had one season without Russell Westbrook. Westbrook has played all but 14 games, and I mean, I don't remember. I think he's in the hundreds at this point. I'll try and look that up quickly. But Russell Westbrook has played hundreds of games in his NBA career at this point, and only 14 of those haven't had Kevin Durant in them. So he's at 440. So, he's played with Durant almost his entire career. Durant's played with Westbrook almost his entire career. Trying to decouple them and say on-off just doesn't work because so many other variables change, except last year, Westbrook was injured for a little over a month. And in that month, Kevin Durant basically played the most efficient basketball of his career. On a permanent basis, he took, 32.9 shots per 48 minutes. And his true shooting percentage in that month, this was January of 2014, it was 68.5%, which is the best it's been his entire career. So Durant took the most shots of his career. Durant shot the most efficiently of his career. Again, I'm not going to use that to say Westbrook is a bad player. That's not what I'm saying. It just seems odd to me that during his MVP season, people are leaving out the fact that Durant was basically able to do it without Westbrook's help. And in fact, we should be asking ourselves, why is Durant not taking more shots? Because if we look at Durant for the last several years, 2002, 2012 on, the worst month, complete month, so I left out things like October and April where they only play like a few games. The worst month, he shot 59.7% true shooting. Again, that is 5% better than Westbrook. So to me, unless you think that Durant would just completely airball an additional 2 or 3 shots, it seems ludicrous to me the amount of shooting Westbrook does without Durant. Now, again, I think his points are going to look fine without Durant. That team is also a good team. We've talked a little bit about Scott Brooks. So if Steve Adams actually gets play instead of Kendrick Perkins, if obviously they still have Ibaka, Westbrook is still a good player. They're probably going to be a good team. They're not going to miss the playoffs. I wrote a core article on this, but the reality is Westbrook without Durant is not going to look like Durant without Westbrook. I'm actually a little excited for this. I want to see a month or two of Westbrook without Durant, and we can compare the two. At the end, we can say, here's what Westbrook looked like without Durant. Here's what Durant looked like without Westbrook, and kind of get a definitive answer. So I'm a little excited about that, but figured I'd comment. That was pretty much all I had, and I know that wasn't even answering the question of what does it mean for the Thunder that Durant is out.
I hate to
Now,
bait you on this, Dre, but I bet he will have a lot of points per game scored during that period of time,
oh,
and everyone will
absolutely.
love him for that.
Well, I mean, the thing is, my upbringing, so to speak, in advanced stats in basketball started with Carmelo Anthony. So, what I mean by this is, when I was a kid, I used to watch like the Kim Mutombo, but we didn't have easy access to box scores then. We had the newspaper. So, when I started watching the Nuggets again with Carmelo Anthony, I would often go online to yahoo.com to see what happened. And what I know I used to do is I basically just used to say, did Melo score more than 25 points in the game? And I'd watch the game so I could use the justification. Yeah, but he was double teamed and he was doing it at best, and none of the other players were moving around. So yeah, he missed a lot, but it's justified. And I would use this very stupid metric, I'll admit. If Melo scored more than 25 points in a game and the Nuggets lost, it wasn't Melo's fault. Brilliant, right? So I just know for a fact, because that was me before I started learning advanced stats. I know for a fact we're going to have casual fans that are like, Westbrook is putting the team on his shoulder, but the rest of the Thunder need to step up because Westbrook's going to have like a 35-point game that they lose because Westbrook missed 15 times. That's going to happen. All right, so another offseason topic I wanted to bring up was Klay Thompson. I don't know why it got on my mind this week so much because, he's been in the news a lot in this offseason with, allegedly being on the block for Kevin Love. But the reality for me, and I'll couch this statement because I've gotten some arguments I may give a little leeway to, is that if we examine Klay Thompson's performance and production in his first 3 seasons, he just hasn't been a good player. And what that means is he just hasn't been doing things to help his team win. Actually, I'm going to start with this and basically go, I've basically gotten two arguments, which is Klay Thompson is amazing. He's good at defense. He spreads the floor. He helps out his team. And then what I'll basically say is, well, maybe, but even if we thought he was really good at D, and even if we thought he was helping out his team, he is so much below average in all these other things. And there was a post I wrote, which basically shows his scoring and non-scoring stats and basically says the only thing he's really good at is three-point shooting. But basically, I'll say he would have to be so amazing, I don't buy it. And this is actually, I think I'll call it the Boris Diaw argument, which is everybody believes Boris Diaw was one of the best defenders in the NBA. I don't know if I buy that. But Boris Diaw's game, or not Boris Diaw, Bruce Bowen. Apologies to Boris Diaw. Boris Diaw, you've actually been amazing, so apologies on that. But Bruce Bowen on the Spurs, people would basically say Bruce Bowen was an amazing lockdown defender. But if you looked at his production, he was so bad at everything else that he would have had to have been an amazing defender for me to buy it. And it was also hard for me to buy that we could basically credit Bruce Bowen with the Spurs' defensive prowess when essentially they had, David Robinson and Tim Duncan, two very tall guys. And it turns out that's one of the best defenses you can have. If you have a semi-mobile 7-footer, that makes it really hard to score close to the hoop. So I don't know how much credit to give Bruce Bowen. But what I will say is, even if we think he's a great defender, the rest of his game was so bad. There's no way he was an above average player. I'm sorry. And so Klay Thompson's in the same boat. According to points over par per 48, he basically, if he were to play the full game, would basically be spotting the opponent a point and a half, almost a point, 1.2 points. Sorry. Basically, we're picturing this all else being equal, the opponent would win by 1.2 points if Klay played the whole game. And that's because most of his game just isn't very good. So what I'll hear in response to that is, well, it's not really Klay's fault, right? Mark Jackson had specific offensive sets for Klay that involved him taking these mid-range jumpers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but taking these bad mid-range jumpers. And as a result, it's not Klay's fault he was bad. All right, that's actually fun. I'll actually give some credence to that argument because one of the least consistent stats we notice year to year is shooting efficiency. But basically what I'm going to say is you get one or the other. You get to say Klay Thompson has been a good player and helped his team win these first 3 seasons. And as a result, we think the Warriors would be fools to get rid of him. Or you get to say Klay Thompson has not been a good player, but it wasn't his fault and we think he can improve. By the way, swapping out Mark Jackson with Steve Kerr is an amazing natural experiment. So I'm excited about that as well. But you don't get both, and that bugs me a lot. I'll see that a lot when I argue NBA players. You don't get to argue that they are both good, but then it's not their fault that they are a bad player. You get one or the other. Now, when we look at Klay Thompson too, by the way, one of the things I notice people like about him is kind of the horse problem. So Brian, that nylon calculus, I love this. Nylon calculus has shooting charts, and what the problem they have is they do the Kurt Goldsberry method, which basically says you look at where a player shoots from, you look at the league average from that spot and use that to judge how good the player is at shooting from that spot. The problem with that, and we know this, is not all shot locations are created equal. Ian Levy of Hickory High and now Nylon Calculus came up with a metric called expected points per shot on this very point. Basically, a 3-point shot, if you shoot 33% from the three, that is worth 50% from two. And it's basically the quick trick you can do to yourself on 3-point shooting is add about 18. It's not exact. It's a 1.5% per every one up. But essentially, if you add about 18% to someone's 3-point shooting efficiency, that's how well they'd have to shoot from two to be worth it. So when you look at Klay Thompson, his 40 some odd percent, his 42% from three is over 60% from two. It's remarkable. So, but his 46% from mid range, he doesn't get any extra points. He doesn't get bonus points for making a hard shot. So, really, what I'll point out is it's the horse effect. Klay Thompson will take some difficult shots and shoot above average relative to the NBA, but his problem is he just takes too many of them. He takes too many mid range jumpers. Klay Thompson, like I mentioned, takes 9 3-point attempts per 48 minutes, which is a ton. But he also takes more 2-point attempts than the average shooting guard. And when I was comparing him to Kyle Korver, that's actually the difference. Kyle Korver just takes a ton of threes. He doesn't take a ton of twos, though. He takes significantly fewer twos. So really, Klay Thompson's problem is all of the goodwill he's making with these amazing 3-point shots, he's wasting on contested or ill-advised 2-pointers. He's not good from two. And he doesn't get to the line. That's another problem. Good NBA players. This is what Kobe is really good at, by the way, is getting to the line. He doesn't get to the line. So he's not really that great a scorer. He's like 55.5% true shooting, which is good, but not amazing. And then additionally, he doesn't do anything else. People will bring up defense. Like I said, when I looked at Synergy, my Synergy Sports is down, which is a shame. When we looked at defense on Synergy, I didn't see anything there that indicated Klay was an amazing defender. He might have been good. And the other problems I have with using defense as an argument, and I was bringing this kind of up with Bruce Bowen, is that defense is a team activity. And usually if we find good or bad defenses, it's going to require multiple good pieces. As a case in point, Kevin Garnett, his last season in Minnesota before he went to Boston, Minnesota, I think, was bottom 10 in the league in defensive efficiency. Goes to Boston, wins Defensive Player of the Year, and Boston has like one of the best defenses. The problem is you can't just have one good defender. You need multiple. And if we look in Golden State, the addition of Andrew Bogut and Andre Iguodala did tons for their D. So I always get a little problematic because basically if you want good defensive skills, you basically need a good mentality and a good team. And it's much harder to credit that to the individual. So those are really my hiccups with Klay Thompson. Like I said, this year I think we'll have a nice natural experiment. One note I'll make though is that I still think Korver is a much better player, has been his entire career, and is much better value. Klay Thompson, basically just because he scores a lot of points, is going to command a contract over $10 million a year. Kyle Korver, just got a contract at about $6 million a year. So when it comes down to it, based on what I've seen from Klay Thompson, I think he's overrated. If we don't see a massive improvement in his game this next season, the Warriors would do well to let him go. And he's just, Klay Thompson's one of those players, kind of like Russell Westbrook, Kobe Bryant, that just kind of gets my goat how much defense people give him on the internet. So that's all I really got on Klay Thompson. You're gonna try and bait me more, Brian, or are we good there?
Now I'll just bring up what I said about this earlier, which is that, as a guy who watches all the Warriors games, my biggest pet peeve, non-stats pet peeve anyway, although I do have the basketball reference shot chart up to back it up right now, is he takes so many fadeaway jumpers from that left baseline on the shot chart. There is such a big pile of red X's right there, and he shoots the lowest percent from that spot. And unfortunately, I did see him go to that move a few times in the preseason, so I don't think Kerr has gotten him to go away from it yet. So I am a little concerned, but we'll see. Cautiously optimistic.
I like your line. Just so many red X's from that spot. Jeez. All right. But I mean, it's red. It's yay points. He gets lots of points from that spot. Anyway, so obviously those topics were not really too much to do with projections of the upcoming season, but that is something a lot of you have been asking for in the comments, and we appreciate it. And the fact of the matter is Arturo actually has crunched the numbers, so projections are on the horizon. What I will say, and this is unfortunately just one of my biases as one of the editors and the primary editor at Boxscore Geeks, is over the years I've just gotten less and less inured with projections. First off, because they're used incorrectly as a barometer of good statistical work, and that's an entire other discussion. Be aware in the comments if you're going to address that. You had better come with good arguments. I'm not going to let just the best metric is going to predict the next season the best. That's just not argument fodder I'm willing to listen to. But one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of projections is they're just really, really difficult because of so much. It's the unknown unknowns is what Nate Silver called them in his book. And as a case in point, look at this preseason. Michael Carter-Williams, Kevin Durant, Steve Nash have already all gone down injured. And as we know, this is probably going to impact all of their respective teams. And that's just one of the hardest things to know. We know in a given NBA season that some players and some high-profile players are going to get injured for a significant time in the season. We just don't know who. And that has a huge impact both on their wins and their opponents' wins. So that already just makes it kind of hard to know what's going to happen in the NBA season. And it's why I'm less excited about it, because essentially we're a statistical site. We like doing in-depth statistical analysis. And when we start getting into territory that just turns more into guesswork, where we basically have to filter what we're saying with a ton of, caveats. If Kevin Durant is healthy, and if the Lakers don't get an unlucky trade, and if this and this and this happen, then I think this will happen. The minute you start doing that and you realize just how flimsy that argument is and how quickly any one of those blocks can be turned, it just gets less fun for me. And that's kind of my personal take. But as I said, don't worry, they are coming. And this is the surprise part. So Brian, just as a treat to our fans on the show who put up with us and listen, what we're probably going to release them as, I can't guarantee for sure because I'm batting this back and forth with the other authors, is we're probably going to start releasing them in chunks. So for instance, division is a really common way to do it. But I figured what we could do is we're going to leak some of our projections for a division on the show right now, and then future posts will have them. So Brian, you get to decide the division we leak to our lucky viewers.
Oh, this is a tough one. Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm going to play this out. Let's bring up all the, divisions here for us to look at. I'll go through my thought process.
And actually, I want to hear you say your thought process for the listeners so we know why you chose.
So my thought process is just about, well, maybe the injuries. Maybe I'm biased by you just talking about them just now, but yeah, sort of which teams will be the farthest away from what we're expecting and who are moving the most because of those injuries and or off-season moves. So, and I have seen some of Arturo's numbers, so I'm going to cheat a little bit, but not all of them. So, okay, Northwest here. Of course, the Durant injury is interesting. Minnesota, we're very interested in as well, losing Love, but maybe going to be a little better than we'd think. Of course, the Pacers with their injuries. The Bulls coming back strong, and the Cavaliers. Central will be crazy. Man, there's some good ones here. Let's see. Let me take a look. Let's go with the Central. Let's go with the Big Daddy.
Central. Okay. So this is interesting, actually. This is not what I'd expect, but I think Arturo may be going for possible injuries. Obviously, they have players like Varejao. LeBron James is older, but Arturo in his simulation has the wins for the Cleveland Cavaliers at 54.7, which is, by the way, under the Vegas over-under. He's got the Bulls with a healthy Rose coming back at 40, not 50, well, that'd be amazing, 45.5 wins. The Pistons, who have Andre Drummond and not much else, are at 33.5 wins. The Pacers, oh man, talk about a fall from grace. Don't forget, they won the East last year. They were the team 2 years ago, almost in the finals. And now this year, Arturo has them pegged at 31.7 wins. And finally, my own, I guess, Dave keeps prodding me and claiming these are my new home team because I live in Wisconsin now. But the Milwaukee Bucks, to round out the Central Division, are expected to finish at, according to Arturo's simulation, at 25.5 wins. So, yipes.
Giving the Pacers a run for their money. Did you include the Pistons there, Dre, or did I miss them?
Pistons were 33.5.
33. Interesting.
And so, I mean, the other thing to point out, and I mean, I would actually side, I don't know if he included this, and I mean, one of the things we talked about for future shows or whatever is we'll definitely have Arturo on to talk his thought process, is that 54.7 in terms of wins. If we look at the wins in the East, he doesn't expect, I'll give you another spoiler, the second best team Arturo is expecting in the East this season is the Toronto Raptors at 51 wins. So the issue there, right, is the Cavaliers aren't going to be fighting for first place this season like they were last season. And so if I'll let you take a guess. Who do you think the top team out West is?
Oh, it's the Spurs for sure.
Of course, it's the Spurs. Arturo's got them pegged at 60 wins. So if first place is out of reach for the Cavaliers, I can completely see them just resting their guys and being fine with, 54 wins heading into the playoffs. So, like I said, we'll have Arturo on to say more. We'll have posts up talking more about this, but figured we'd at least give you a taste, and don't worry, those will be coming. And so that is pretty much our show, unless you've got anything else to say, Brian. If not, I'm going to head right into shoutouts.
Now I'm ready for shoutouts.
All right. And this first shout out, by the way, should have been its own segment, to be honest, because I'm going to talk a bit about it. But if you check out cbacks.net, again, we just can't avoid this guy, Chris Baxter. I was joking to you online this week that he just needs to join Jonathan Weiler and Kevin Draper as just a lifetime achievement shout out. So we stopped just giving it to him every week. That said, I couldn't avoid it because he's already got one webcomic that you can find every Monday and Thursday at cbacks.net. But he actually has a second comic that is being printed in a Canadian newspaper called Stick and Rink. And his very first one was about nothing less than advanced stats on hockey, but, advanced stats. And he also brings up the eye test. So here's what I love. The second panel, this is not the most exciting thing. You've got it up on the screen. So this is why you should watch the video show and not just listen to the podcast, because this is less exciting. But one of the characters says, but is there a stat for having a shot that can shatter a man's ankle? I think not, because these two people are discussing the eye test. And the other person says, miles per hour. I love this. I love the point that basically in sports, in anything, it's we've got physics and rules. So we have a stat for everything. We may not track it. It may not be in the box score, but essentially the eye test just cannot trump the science test. And as we keep adding things like cameras and more trackers, the idea that we don't have a stat that can explain things, like I hate that common thing, the stats don't explain everything. You're right. All of the stats we're looking at may not, but we have the ability to look at all the stats to explain why what happened in sports, especially. Sports is essentially a very controlled physics experiment. So I love it. That's I think my new favorite webcomic on sports statistics. So that's shout out number one. Shout out number two, I don't know 100% how to say her Twitter handle, but I think it's the Planet Rach. That's RAQ, because I believe her name is Rachel. But she has made a site called blackmambamyths.com. And this was just, blackmambamyth.com. Sorry, not myths. But this was just made for me, I think, because it says, when you say Kobe is the greatest, what you really mean, Kobe is my favorite. There's a difference. This is a site that is just collecting a bunch of stats to prove that Kobe Bryant is not an all-time great. And the easy way they're doing it is comparing him to a bunch of, to basically LeBron and Michael. But my favorite part, just the icing on the cake for this site, is there is an official Black Mamba misses clock on the bottom. He is currently at 13,319 misses in his career. Of course, this will be updating throughout the NBA season. So I love this. I love this site. Can't say enough good about it. Follow the Planet Rachel or the Planet Rach. Sorry, completely messed that up on Twitter. Go look at the site blackmambamyth.com. Just amazing.
I will
My
support him a little bit there, Dre. With all those misses, does that make him the Cal Ripken of basketball? Maybe he, didn't have as good a stats as everyone, but he's really played for a long time.
There is a ton to be said for longevity. And in fact, I seem to recall in one of the last podcasts with Arturo, we were talking all-time greats and who belongs in the Hall of Fame. What amount of credit, and for the record, Arturo did factor this into his updated stats, but what amount of credit to give longevity? Because that is impressive. For instance, comparing Kobe Bryant to Magic Johnson, it's not even close, right? Magic Johnson blows Kobe Bryant away. But obviously, and I mean, tragically for various reasons, Magic Johnson just wasn't able to have a long career. And so we should give some credit to Kobe Bryant for having a long career. And I think he does have the Jeter effect, which is if you win a title for a team and spend your entire career with a team, people have a huge blind spot to you. And so, I mean, that's one reason, for instance, Shaquille O'Neal just doesn't get the same respect Kobe does for Los Angeles, even though the first three finals with Kobe and Shaq, those were like 60, 70% Shaq, I would argue. Anyway. So the very last shout out is you, the Boxscore Geeks followers and commentators. So on last week's show, we talked about the TV deal, the CBA over under, and somehow the discussion comment ended up discussing Wilt Chamberlain and Dennis Rodman, their rebounding abilities. And I love this. This is just an amazing. This warms my heart. I don't think there's a comment section anywhere else on the web talking basketball that has people throwing back rebounding percentages, et cetera, between two greats. I love it. That just warmed my heart to see that day, especially, when we see some comments that, as we mentioned, we got no problem getting rid of them, but some comments that are less than nice, those comments just warm my heart. You guys are awesome. So that's all I got. As I mentioned, we're going to be having projections. The NBA season's only about 2 weeks away. So those will be coming up. You'll hear me be more of a Scrooge. Of course, you'll hear Brian bait me more on why certain scores will do better. So we will see you next week.